Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined on the road by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
No, I watched The Road.
Yes, we are at the end of our apocalypse season. This is the last sort of film we'll be doing a wrap.
The end of The Road.
I was going to say, but this is the end of The Road, and we've ended with The Road. The 2009 Viggo Mortensen film directed by John Hillcoat, who clearly saw other apocalypse films and was like, hold my beer, I want to make the bleakest film based on the what's his name, Cormac McCarthy novel of the same name. This is a film of, in a dangerous post-apocalyptic world, an ailing father defends his son as they slowly travel to the sea. Stars Viggo Mortensen, Cody Smith-McPhee, Charlize Theron, Robert Duvall, Guy Pearce, and several others that sort of appear. But generally, this is about a father and son. So, yeah, initial thoughts then, Julian, on The Road.
I saw this movie in theaters, and
popcorn special.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, like, I just sat in the back of the theater masturbating, I wish I had, because that would have been the only enjoyment I would have had. I really hated this movie when I saw it for the first time in theaters, and I really hate it now. I think this is a poor movie. I do not think this is a good movie. I think it is poorly structured. I think it is about absolutely nothing. I don't think it has anything to say. I think what it tries to say is like, get it? But he loves his son so much. I'm a parent. I really identify with that. There's a lot of fucking other movies that do that. And that is not a goddamn, theme to a fucking movie. Okay.
No, but he fails.
Nothing happens in this movie.
No, I have to say this film is like an hour and 45, I think. And when I watched this, an hour 51. This is now an hour and 50 than this film is, right? Half an hour into this film, I checked. I was half an hour in, and I thought I was at least 45 minutes. And time, is weird watching this film because, so little happens, but it takes a long time for little to happen. And it's so relentlessly bleak, and it moves from this film is an odyssey. I mean, this film is supposed to be an odyssey. It's two characters walking across a desolate landscape from one place to another, and they meet people along the way. But that's literally what this film is. And they're trying to head to the sea, but they don't learn anything. They're not joined by anyone. And the end of it, like you said, the whole point of this film is that this father is so committed to trying to keep his son alive or do the right thing, but at the end of the film, he doesn't do the right thing. So
right,
it can't nothing. This film, like you said, it has nothing to say. But even in having nothing to say, it doesn't even commit to its own intent.
One message of check out the noble sacrifice of the father.
Yeah.
If it really has a message, it's that in trying to protect our children, we can be overly protective and shut out the good people, right? I mean, if this does have a message, I guess it's like in a Walking Dead style, doomed world, don't shut out the possibility of good, even though you've got to be brutal to survive. I mean, at the end, the dad's wrong, and these people have been following, them all along magically, and there's this happy sort of ending. Nothing in this movie works. Um, I don't know. I really, really hate this movie.
No, do you know what? No, I'll tell you what. There's one set of scenes that does work, right? Everything on the road is so endlessly bleak and kind of pointless and doesn't result in anything. I'm bored. This film bores me. And I think that's one of the cardinal sins I will say of a film. If I'm bored, I'm kind of done with you. That's the problem. The scenes that kept me engaged and I was more interested in were the flashbacks. When it has the flashbacks to them living in a house and it's the father, they're not named, it's just man, woman, child, boy, I think they called him in the credits. But it's a father and son. It's Viggo Mortensen, this boy, Cody Smith McPhee, and then Charlize Theron playing the mother. And I'm a massive fan of Charlize Theron. Like I always think she's great. But that scene of of seeing them sort of just before whatever it is that this disaster, this ecological disaster is that caused things, and they wake up and everything's on fire and there's all this other stuff, and then through the flashbacks you see that she has this child that it's years later, and it's kind of her losing hope, and they have these 3 bullets, and all that stuff, and eventually she just sort of gives up, and he's kind of saying like, no, why would you do this? Why can't you say goodbye? And she just walks off into the cold night, in complete hopelessness. All that stuff I actually kind of liked, and I'm like, oh, this follows an arc. It's sort of, I'm following the sort of like the collapse of someone's psyche, and this family that's trying to hold this together, and this grim thought that he's got a gun with 3 bullets, like End of the Mist style kind of like thing. I'm gonna, okay, that stuff was good. That bit, I was like, I want to watch that film. Give me an hour and a half of that story that leads to them going off on the road, because everything else on the road is boring.
Yeah, I feel the same way, but I accept the correction. And I sort of wonder, is the wife suffering from postpartum depression? In addition to just hopelessness about there's not food, right? We're all going to die. We know where the story ends.
She says that she says she has a really cool line where she says he says about, like, something like, when did you lose hope? And she says, I'll tell you when I lost hope was the moment he was born.
Yeah.
And you're like, and that's a real, like, you're like, oh, that's a big line. So
yeah, but again, like, those are kind of like themes. I don't know how that fits with the rest of the story. Like, I mean, because and Morganson, does a good job. I mean, it's well acted. He, is like, we've got to, focus on the child. We've got to have hope. All of this. She wants them to kill themselves too, right? And so, yeah, that stuff is good. But again, I think we're supposed to think that he as a father made the right choice in, not killing his child who he's trying to protect as long as he can, and that this is what you do as a dad, right? I mean, of course, watched by soccer dads, who have never had to do anything like this, but who romanticize what they're doing as if they're just like, such sacrificing, people just like this, that this speaks to them is a dangerous thing in my mind. But then at the end, his sacrifice wasn't for anything, or it kind of was good, but it, also closed them off from what could have been a lot better life. So yeah, I mean, it can't even get that right.
Well, this is the one thing I was curious about in this, because many of the things we've talked about, in the last episode, we had Children of Men. Before that, we've had like Mad Max has in Beyond Thunderdome. They have this idea of the sort of, there's even in like I Am Legend, there's this idea of like the haven. There's this legend of a place to go that can, they've got this thing there that's where humanity has sort of survived in some form or whatever. This kind of has it, and it sort of like says, are we going to make it to the sea? But there's no like point.
Legend or reason, right?
Yeah, there's no like point
Yeah.
other than we're heading in that direction. Like that's it. They say they're heading south, and I'm like, oh, you must be heading for the equator then, because maybe things are better at the equator. Like I don't know. Like you're not told enough about this world. I mean, again, parts of it are shot really well. There's some scenes one with the fire and some of the scenes that like stand out because they look good, because everything else is just drab, like brown and grey. I mean, I read reviews of this. They're like, "Oh, this is beautifully shot, and this is amazing in that sense." I'm like, "It's not though. It's really not, because scenes are static. They look drab, like nothing happens, and the fact that they're not going anywhere with a purpose. I'm kind of like, I don't care for the characters. I don't know what your journey is about. I'm kind of like, I'm really struggling to sort of get a grip on what it is I'm supposed to be sort of like the hook of this film. Oh, the hook's the family. You go like, no, it's not, because like they're not interesting characters. There's nothing there for me to hold on to.
Yeah, they're not interesting characters, and in the end, the dad was wrong. So,
Yeah.
I don't know. I was really worried that you would like this film because this film is so beloved. My brother loves this film. So many, major critics love this movie. I think they're crazy. I mean, I think they're taking crazy pills. And look, I mean, look, I will say, yeah, it's drab. There are a lot of shots where I say, this looks good. I mean, there are shots where I also say, yeah, there are too many trees and you couldn't hide certain things, right? But look, the acting is fantastic. I think that, the shots are, there are a lot of shots that are really bleak and but then I find myself thinking like, how many millions of dollars did you spend to just make like desolate, destroyed landscapes that will photograph in HD really well, right? Because that's all this movie is, right?
Mm.
I mean, I mean, it makes I mean, I watched this and I'm also bored. Like, I remembered that the scene with like the sniper, and I'm like,
Mm.
where he has to take cover. And I remembered that, and I remembered like that as sort of like the climax or near the climax, and that was sort of like
Oh, with
a
the bow
much
and arrow.
longer scene. Yeah, with
Mm.
the bow and arrow. And I remembered that as like a much longer scene that was like 20 minutes of going behind stuff. And it's like, no, he just goes behind one thing and then goes in and they're dead. It's like another 5-minute episode that amounts to nothing. The one thing I remembered that I thought like it does at least have some kind of structure, no, that's not there either. What
Wait,
is the fucking appeal of this movie?
I
Why do people
honestly,
think this is so good?
I don't know, and I was kind of confused. I'm glad we're on the page, because I was worried the same way. I was like, oh, am I wrong? Like, I don't know why I'm bored watching this film. Like, and The Walking Dead came to mind again. I think there's like an aesthetic about it that is very sort of feels very Walking Dead. But the difference is like those characters. The Walking Dead comes with a soap opera. Like it's like, here's a soap opera with zombies, so we're gonna get invested in the sort of the story of it, and the episode to episode fun and games. This film is episodic by its very nature. Odyssey films are episodic. That's again just the way they are. But the episodes don't amount to anything. Like they should be learning things. He's still doing the same. The father's doing the same things at the end of the film that he was doing at the beginning of the film. Like there's no learning. There's no sort of like arc to this character that sort of says, I've learned this lesson from interacting with these people, or oh, we're going to meet cannibals. Oh, we're going to basically meet the Texas Chainsaw family with with people in the basement. Oh, we're going to meet this thief. Oh, we're going to like old man. Like, all right, he's nicer to the old man, but only because of the boy. And even the boy gets worse. The boy becomes like more like whimpering and sniveling towards the end of the film, and I'm kind of irritated by him. But he's like, Papa, Papa, can we do this? Papa. And I'm just like, shut up. Like it just becomes a grating irritant sort of towards the end of the film. So yeah, I don't know. It just kind of feels like it feels aimless, and also it doesn't amount to anything. So and maybe that's the kind of thing that people are going like, oh no, it's realistic in that sense. I'm going like, no, it's not. Like I don't know. It
Well,
didn't.
I mean, there are people who would say, like, look, The Walking Dead, because it's so soap operatic, is unbelievable. There are lots of unbelievable elements in The
Oh yeah,
Walking Dead, logistically ridiculous things. The soap opera is just, it's too melodramatic. This avoids all of that. It's great that the character doesn't have an arc. It's great that, I mean, I understand all of that intellectually. And all of those criticisms of The Walking Dead are true. But The Walking Dead has characters.
yeah,
I mean, for all of its melodrama, all of its stupid logistical stuff, I have no problem with anyone who says, even in, the first and second season, like this, it jumped the shark with, unrealistic dumb shit. Absolutely.
yeah.
But at least there are brilliant episodes that are focused on characters, even if they're bleak as hell, making the decision to kill people, to, forsake their families, I mean, dark shit. But it's focused on character. You can identify with it. It tells a story. There is no story here.
No.
And I remember when I first watched this in theaters, there were several times where I broke out into laughter in the movie. And of course, I'm the only one laughing, but where I have this habit. First, I always find stuff funny that other people don't, and I never laugh at the obvious jokes because I see them coming a mile away. And then I just look around like, is everyone else stupid? Like, really? You were charmed by that? So, but I actually find several moments in this movie funny because they're so bleak. I mean, it's like Titus Andronicus, where you sort of like, it's so violent and bleak that you kind of like push it to a point where even
Yes.
though this movie isn't a parody, it's almost so bleak and so relentlessly bleak. It's like, I'm going to have another conversation about suicide with my son in a desolate landscape, and I just break into laughter.
Not it's like, yeah, look, those parody films like, epic movie, not another teen movie. This would be like another apocalypse movie. No, you're right. There's it's not quite. I didn't break into laughter or anything, but there's at least three moments where I am sort of like, oh, like, this is like, like when a dog sort of does that thing where it sort of its head turns, it's a bit confused, where it's sort of like, I'm not quite sure. There's several moments where I'm like, I'm not quite sure this works. The first one being they meet the cannibals, and there's a whole section where they're hiding up the edge of the road off the embankment, and he's got the gun and he kills the guy who's taking a pee. And then after all that, after they've gone and it's all gone, he sort of walks down to the road, and they find that the guy that they shot, these cannibals have gutted him and his head and his intestines and stuff, and his clothes are piled on the floor, and they've all gone, and they've obviously just taken his body and stuff. And it's that in that moment, sort of, you have like, Viggo Mortensen's character man just looks at it for a few seconds, and he studies it, and I'm doing the same, and I'm going like, huh, I think you think this is shocking, but it kind of comes across as like, but it almost comes across as like Walking Dead level melodramatic ridiculous. I'm like, huh, doesn't quite fit with the tone of the film, but all right, fine, And so you're right. There's that moment. That was the first one, and the second one is when they are trapped in the building, and he's got his gun to the gun to his son's head, and it takes. It's one of the longest scenes. Like, other scenes just sort of happen and move on, and you are kind of like, this. This is lingering on this. It's I'm not particularly interested. I want you to pull the trigger just to see if something happens at this point. Like, is that what the second half of this film is? You wandering the landscape, having killed your son. Cool, let's go on with that. Like, yeah, it's
At least something would happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then he decides not to, but it's an impromptu decision. It's like, I think we have a chance to run, right? Because he's only got one bullet left at that point, right? He can kill his son, but then he's going to be cannibalized, presumably. But then he's like, oh, let's, on a whim, after this long scene, he decides to run with the son. And it's like, well, was there really an opportunity? Or, could he have waited for that opportunity before preparing his son to be murdered by his father?
Before traumatizing
are we
your
supposed
child.
to feel something about that? Or, it just seems like this is like a parody, right? Where it's like, how can we add something darker to this, right?
Yeah.
Like, a man and his son, like, oh, the food's poisoned and they vomit. And then they have another conversation about like, should we kill ourselves now or later? And it gets to the point where it just feels like a parody to me.
Oh no, I agree. I mean, that scene, you say about the escape, that scene is hilarious. It is funny. It's genuinely funny in that sense of badly written storytelling. Because there's a sketch thing that I forget the guy's name, Brian something. He does these sketches on YouTube, and it's called pitch meetings, where he'll be like, it's him telling us a studio exec about a film, and it'll be like, a comedy breakdown of a film. And there's always a moment where it's sort of like, oh, so they're in trouble, they're in real dire trouble. Oh my god, it must be incredibly difficult for them to have escaped. Not really, barely an inconvenience. That's what this felt like. It's like he's so desperate that he's actually contemplating killing his own son. Oh my god, so it must be a real trauma, a real challenge to escape the house. No, barely an inconvenience. Like they literally run and jump out of a window and then they're off, and it's never mentioned again. It's like, what?
Right.
What happened? What? Why did that even become a thing then? Like it's so bizarre. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it is. It's like, yeah, maybe just wait a few minutes and see if they wander away, like, I don't know. And then it feels like, it feels like they're playing, a video game that's like a stealth video game or something where, it just seems so arbitrary.
Well,
There were a number of times watching this where I I'm so bored and so annoyed watching this that there are a number of times where I found myself putting in my head playing the theme song to Curb Your Enthusiasm, or that that Bicycle Bell in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I mean, and both of those, especially Always Sunny, go to some dark places, right? But like It's Always Sunny, like Charlie would say, do you think we should kill ourselves? And then it would be like, and I found myself supplying, like a laugh track. And I think like there's a cut of this movie where they do that, where this is actually like a really funny comedy.
Yeah, there's an SNL sketch to get out of this. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I think that's the problem. Is in its desperate it need to be like the bleakest experience put on film. It kind of becomes a parody of itself by the end of it, doesn't it? Like it also shows like the ineptitude of the people. One of the things that sort of you realize is they've been on the road for quite some time. They've been like you find that the mum obviously had the child post whatever the apocalyptic event was. All right. She was pregnant at the time of this, whatever this catastrophe was. Okay. So the child's born just after. The kid's at least 10, if not 11. So there's been post-apocalyptic for a decade. Yet they still don't seem to have acquired any skills that kind of help them survive. In a decade, they're still scrounging for food. They've not said, okay, we find new things to eat, or we've not moved on to this or that. Like it feels inept. Like it feels, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I would. Maybe that's what I'd be like. But I don't know. It just feels like you've raised this child for 10 years. You've kept this child alive. You then made this choice to hit the road, which seems like an odd choice. I don't know why. What don't your mission is, apart from to see the sea. I don't know. It just all feels kind of like inept.
Well, one way that I felt that is like they'll take supplies, but they don't seem to take enough. Like they don't seem to have a logistical conversation about like the advantages versus disadvantages of like pulling a wheelbarrow full of supplies, right? It's just something they do. And there are other times where they leave things, they give things to somebody because the kid wants them to, but there's never any like logistical consideration, right? Like you're saying, right? There isn't like this experience. One way that I really felt what you're talking about is how they're constantly stumbling into bad situations with small groups of survivors.
Yeah.
It's like surely there's some sign you're in somebody else's territory. Like you're basically wandering on a road, you know you're going to keep hitting this shit, but they're yet constantly just stumbling into these situations where it's like, oh, let's look in this house. Oh shit, they're coming home. Like, I mean, this is a 2-hour movie that's episodic and it repeats itself.
Mm.
So, I don't know. I felt like surely if you're in somebody's home, you'd be watching for this. Like, you'd have a protocol. I mean, at one point they find a shelter, that's as close as it gets to a happy moment, and he sort of hears the dog above. This movie loves to never explain anything. It feels like that is, more realistic. You never find out what happened to the black guy they stripped. You never find out if there really was a dog or, but you should have some protocols in place. You should have some way of handling with people. There should be some, it's been 10 years, right? There'd be some hand signal that indicates, we're not a threat. Nobody, none of this exists, right? Nobody ever is smart.
The other thing that really kind of annoyed me about this film is he has this gun, and he obviously, they've used one of the bullets, which is what leads to sort of the mother sort of walking off into the dark. And so he's got his 2 bullets in his gun, and he ends up using the other one. We then see there are other people with guns. All right, other people have got rifles, other people have got other guns. All right. In my head, I'm still going like, okay, this is 10, let's say 10 years after. I don't know, how bad things are. I've been to the States. I know how many guns are for sale in like sports goods stores, all that sort of stuff. Like, but more than that, get guns, fine. It's not hard to come across or hold on to like knives, axes, other things. Like, there's no point do they sort of go, we've forged this, this. The other films have done this where they go like, this piece of metal has now been forged into a blade. That's now our weapon. Like, we were doing this as cave people thousands of years ago, yet there's this weird sort of notion of not having a weapon other than this gun, and it really starts to piss me off halfway through this film, where I'm like, you want to protect your son, but you've got no offensive weapons, you've got no axe, you've got no knives. Like, you kind of look a bit lost in all this. It's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, that same thing irritated me because, you've got all these groups with various guns. He's going through lots of houses and landscapes. There's tons of guns around that are better than a revolver with 2 bullets.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and yet the movie wants to make such a big deal out of, the 3 bullets, the 2 bullets, I mean, it doesn't work unless you just kind of ignore reality. And you're right about the knives, right? I mean, like, none of this has been thought out. Again, like, this movie wants to say, I mean, obviously this predates a lot of the zombie stuff, but this movie wants to say, like, sort of forget the melodrama of The Walking Dead and, all of the, a boy and his dog. We don't need no telepathic dogs here. We're going to show you the hard truth, right? Except its vision of what the apocalypse is going to look like is there's not enough food and everybody's really dirty.
Yeah.
But that's not actually logistical. That's not actually smart, right? You have it. Where are your devices? Where, why don't you have a gun? What's your protocol for keeping food, for, checking if it's safe, where are the knives? This movie has it substitutes beautifully done makeup and grime for any of this logistical stuff or human stuff. It's not interested in all of that. What it's interested in is bleak.
Yes.
And to that point, like, all of these human groups are really small groups. Now, maybe that's this movie's version, right? We don't know how many people are left. Is there any point at which, like, the cannibals are going to sit around and sing campfire songs? You know what I mean? Like, humans are so relentlessly optimistic, right? I mean, we distract ourselves. We are a game-playing people. We amuse ourselves with thoughts. I know your point is to be bleak, and so I'm going to have another scene where you're training your son how to kill himself effectively, which makes me laugh. But, where's, I mean, a little bit of levity, a little bit of just the basic amount of human singing songs together kind of stuff that we do, even when we're exhausted. I mean, I've run, races where at the end I literally felt like I was possibly going to die. And I'm talking with people and laughing and joking. And yeah, I know, I know I'm going to get food again or whatever. But I mean, like, people in foxholes make jokes with each other.
Gallows humor. You need that dark. We as humans do that dark humor, or we need to break the tension. We actually said this in the last episode with Children of Men. We talked about the scene, the childbirth scene, where the tension is broken with a joke, with a witty response. People aren't comedians, but people are funny. People like to make people laugh. People like to enjoy being sort of like, you and I, we've said before, like a witty response, or you'll do things like, I don't know, it just, yeah, this film is so, there's no wit, there's no levity, there's no humor, there's no whimsy. It's bleak, 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 and there's nothing to it, and that's, I think that's the problem.
It confuses being bleak with having something to say.
Yes.
And I'm all for bleak. I'm not against bleak. I don't need everything to be a glossy Marvel movie. I'm all for dark, difficult messages. This movie has no message, except love your kid, but you're in the wrong. I mean, don't be too overprotective. I don't know. I mean, it doesn't really even present that. Its point is it's bleak after apocalypse, and you've never really been shown that, and now we're going to show it to you. Except that's not human nature. It's not logistically true. It's so over the top that it's, comedic.
Yeah. I mean, the
Yeah.
one character they meet an old blindish man played by Robert Duvall, and Robert Duvall again is more. I like Robert Duvall. I think he's a good actor, got good presence. Even as he's got older, I think I really like him. He's got like an interesting sort of. He's one of those character actors. I kind of like, his face when he sort of turns up in things. He weirdly does bring almost like a levity at one point. Like he said that there's a. It's not. I don't think it's supposed to be a joke, but the way he delivers the line, like he thinks it's a joke. I can imagine there being the director going like, no, 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 this is not a joke. The dad, Vigo's character, says, he asks how old he is. He says, I'm 90, and he says, oh. He says, don't be, don't basically, I'm calling you on your bullshit. You're not 90. I'm sure you just say that to people so they don't hurt you. And he says, yeah, yeah, yeah. He says, does it work? And he says, no, it doesn't. So there's this line is going like, I can't even lie, and people are going to beat up an old man. Like it feels like it's supposed to be bleak, but the way Robert Duvall sort of responds to it is almost like with a chuckle. So when he says, does it work? He's like, no, it doesn't. Like, it's he thinks it's funny. I can imagine the director sort of steaming at like, no, be remorseful and cry about this, that you get beaten. Like even that, like when they try and do it, like it's such a small moment, but like it feels out of place in the rest of it. It's so weird. But yeah, like that's a moment that you could be like, here's this old man that survived most of his life before this apocalypse. Like, this is the time to have a little bit of levity. Like when they are sat around eating, and he'll say like, and no, they're going to talk about him thinking he saw an angel in the boy. Like it's just sort of like weird. You're like, oh God.
Yeah, that's some grown-worthy shit there. But I like Duvall. I mean, I like that character, I mean, that's not the weakest part of the movie.
Oh,
But,
no, no, no.
right. I mean, but I'm with you. It's like, I mean, a little, that what they're going for is like, look, this is based on a novel.
Mm-hmm.
The novel is a terribly written novel. It won the Pulitzer Prize. God knows why. I mean, if this isn't the proof that that's worthless, I don't know what is. But I mean, open the first page of that novel. It's filled with just hard to read sentence fragments, beginning writer mistakes. There's the second line is like, it was darker than dark, and you're just like, this would not pass a high school writing class. But it's that it was darker than dark. That's the moat of this movie, right? Is how bleak can we get this?
Yeah.
But the thing is, it's not bleak. because you and I have seen lots of bleak shit, lots of dark shit that because of a little bit of humanity, a little bit of levity. I mean, like it's the fact that somebody is conflicted, or that people can joke together and have those human moments and then stab each other in the back, for Machiavelli. That's what's dark, right? That's what really hurts. Here everybody's just bleak and mean to each other all the time. That's
Yeah.
just the mode.
No, I think you're right, and that's the problem. I 100% agree that the problem here is it's mode, as you say. It's sort of like, and it's not even like blacker than black. I'd say it's grey. It's just sort of like, action or like dirt. It's like, even its tone is sort of like, it's attempting to be so bleak and it's so one note. It's like listening to one of those sort of like an emo, really bad emo album where every song is the same kind of dirge, and you just sort of like, yeah, I get that you're unhappy, and fine, I understand. I'm hearing that. Can we move on to something else?
This movie is for people who listen to Cure albums and are like, there's way too much happiness there.
Yeah.
Like there's way too much optimism.
I'm tired of the Cure's summer songs. We need something dark. Yeah, I don't know. But you're right. One of the things I think, especially as we've done this, the post-apocalypse, it's interesting to end on this. The films that do sort of have that, when you really have that gut punch, or you do feel that thing, is when you do have that connection. It tries to do that by having those flashbacks. And I said, I think like those are some of the best moments for me. But I do think of like Mad Max, like you said in the first one. The first one's not a great film, but the moment when when his wife and his kid are killed, that feels like it feels like you go, oh yeah, that's driven him mad. Like I see where the revenge has come from, because of, like, you've seen the relationship between them and all this other stuff. We've seen it in all these other films where relationships are sort of even like Delicatessen, which was like a weird sort of thing. The comedy and weirdness in that makes the cannibalism like really dark, when you're like, oh, like this little oddity of a film, actually has got some really dark moments in it. Like, yeah, it's, you need that level levity, or the
Well, like
moments of hope.
all those little like idiosyncratic things that they do in Delicatessen actually feel darker than The Road, because
Yeah.
those are the meaningless trivialities that they do to keep their mind occupied in this hopeless cannibalistic nightmare that they're really living. I'm not saying that movie overall is darker, but those moments actually, although they're moments of comedy or moments of idiosyncratic, humanity, people are smiling, I mean, like, all of those instincts don't die when you're in a terrible situation, right? I mean,
If anything, they get heightened, don't they? Because you want to break that. We don't like bleakness. We like, this is why you do get people that laugh at funerals, or people will sort of say a dark joke, or like gallows humor. Like, we've heard this thing. People, I don't know, this film doesn't get, weirdly, it wants to show you an honest approach to humanity, but it doesn't understand humanity.
yes, right. I mean, thinking about people who have been in war zones, people who have been refugees, a lot of them, are filled with laughter. And there's a darkness beneath that laughter. There's a putting on a face, but, it's there, right?
You see,
I mean,
the best versions of this that have really provided something that is dark, or a moment that's dark. I think of like Steven Spielberg, like Schindler's List is one of those films that is incredibly dark and incredibly poignant. Sometimes in places a little over saccharine, but that's still a fantastic film. But even that has this thing of going like, right, we're going to focus on the evils of the concentration camps and all sorts of stuff, but it provides like human emotions. There are characters in that have connections, and sort of like, even within the concentration camps, you meet characters that are sort of forming connections, and they're sort of like, I'm not going to say there's jokes, but they have like elements of sort of like humor and stuff between them. There are moments of levity between like Schindler and some of the people. Like you need that there to contrast to how evil and sort of other things are. Otherwise, it's just sort of like everyone is, terrible and it's all this is misery. And it kind of doesn't, it never works. And I think that's why I got bored because I was a bit, as you said, like it's now, yeah, 2 hour film and it kind of feels so endlessly repetitive that I'm just sort of like, yeah, all right, And then what makes it worse is the ending. I just want to highlight how irritated I am by the ending of this film. That this kid has been taught for 10 years, don't trust people, but he's like the hopeful one, which I don't understand where that's come from because his mother committed suicide. His dad was sort of teaching him to commit suicide.
Yeah.
And he's still like, no, we need to help people. I'm kind of like, where have you learned this from? Like, did you have like, like were you raised on certain kids' books that sort of just instilled hope? I don't understand why his child is so different in this way. But then seems to trust this family that turns up after everything. And it's just kind of I don't know, it just felt annoyingly kind of again like meaningless. It's not like he's learned a lesson where like he's learned to hope and trust people and so he's able to walk on with his family. No, he just sort of does. He's just sort of like, yeah, right, you tell me you're a good guy and I see there's these other people with you. All right.
Yeah,
I was so irritated by it.
yeah, it is really frustrating. The whole thing is supposedly that the son has been told they're good guys, but
Hmm.
he is suspicious that that's not actually the case, right? That his dad is too uh cautious, errs on the side of assuming people are bad, winds up treating them as if they're bad, even if they really aren't. And, okay, that dynamic is obvious enough. Okay, first of all, from actual life, a child at that age, his idea of what's good and bad is what his dad told him,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, like, I mean, people behave in repugnant ways, and compartmentalize and will treat, minorities and, women or any group that's been designated as the other, right, in ways utterly inconsistent with their values. And actually, it's not until adulthood that you start to realize that that stuff doesn't make sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're 11 is not the time that you're challenging your parents, going like, I'm not sure that you are consistent in your application of morality,
Yeah.
father. Uh, you know, I don't know. I mean, it's so overdone, and you know where that's coming from, right? It's like the goodness of a child, kind of, we're cynical adults, but a child is hope in the future kind of shit. But I mean, that's a cliche. That's not humanity. And if you want to get at that, there's a way of getting at that filtered through, the full panoply of human emotions and experience. That ending bothers me too, because you were left to believe that this is really just a nice group that's been following them, but they were kind of like scared to approach because they saw the father was a monster. Except we're not supposed to think the father was a monster. How have they been following them? Like they've gone through like one horrible situation after another. Was this
Well,
group just watching them from the trees, going like, hope that kid isn't cannibalized in this time,
well, this is what, yeah, this is the bit that really annoys. So we've seen that they obviously, because he sees the boy in that built up area, doesn't he? And he sort of says to his dad, like, I saw a boy, I've got to see him, which makes no sense because even the dad's like, what do you mean? He's like, I can't explain it, I've just got to see him. And I'm just like, this is just irritating. Papa, I've got to see him. Papa, I've got to say, sorry, just whiny voice saying Papa repeatedly grates the hell out of me. But yeah, it makes no sense. And then, like you say, this thing of saying, oh, they've been following him. I'm going, like, well, how long? Because they've been through some shit, and you didn't try and help. They've literally just been robbed, and you didn't stop the thief. I'm really
Right.
confused now. Like you are no better than anybody else. You are terrible
What
people.
what do you do with that black guy that was stripped and like left with no food? Like, did you intervene there?
Oh well,
You know,
well, this because they asked him, "Do you eat people?" And like Guy Pearce as the veteran, he's called. He's like, "No, we don't eat people. Uh, don't try looking for the black guy though. You won't find him. He's
yeah.
yeah. Oh no,
And it's just so confused, and it feels like, such a tacked on kind of like happy ending.
but it's not a happy
That's
ending.
just, but it's not, right? I mean, this is like the bleakest movie, but it wants to say like the father at least got, wasn't perfect, but got at least delivered the son to these people. Except the father didn't deliver the son to these people. These people appear out of nowhere. Nothing about this makes sense. It's utterly unearned. Again, what the fuck is the appeal of this movie? What is
I,
it?
I have no idea. I honestly don't know. I mean, if you really wanted to hold, be brave and really go for it, you should have an ending where the child tries, after everything, just sits on the beach, puts the gun in his mouth, pulls the trigger, and the gun jams. That's the ending I want to see, where he's just sat there, like the gun doesn't even work anymore. Like it just feel like they just this thing of having finding the family. It doesn't provide. You said that the kids are the hope. It doesn't provide any hope because they're still going to have to survive in this bleak, unrelenting environment. If anything, now there's more of them, so they've got to feed more mouths. They've got to protect more people. I don't know if they have a home. Like it feels worse. I don't know. Yeah, it's just such an odd ending where I said before, like there's the haven. We've said like there's these films or these things where they go, oh yeah, we've got to reach the destination. I mean, the it's almost like the shining star on the hill kind of thing of like that's the place of humanity. That's where it survived. Like they don't even represent that. They're just like, oh, we're just more.
They're just three people on a beach,
Yeah.
right? You don't see that haven, right? You're not told anything about it,
Nope.
right? It kind of gestures in that direction,
Yeah. No. It
but that's
just.
also that's also part of like what you were saying about like the lack of logistics. You
Hmm.
talk about knives, and we don't really know what caused this apocalypse. But like I love vegetables. I'm really into like gardening and trying to be self-sufficient and those ideas, even though I live in a condo and it's really difficult. But like I love that stuff, right? Like you have the idea of like a shelter that's been abandoned that has all of this pre-made pre-packaged food in. I know like the trees are falling down, right? But like has somebody tried hydroponics?
Hmm.
Like you could do it without power. You can generate power, if you got a stream, and a little waterfall. I mean, you know, at least in The Walking Dead, like there are traps in the woods around, the house. Like people have tried to think about these things. You can desalinate water, I mean, there are ways of doing these things. Why do I, as a guy living in a city in a condo, have a better idea of how to survive in a post-apocalyptic universe than any of the characters who have been living it for 10 years?
Yeah, I agree, and that's one of the things that kind of um bothered me in that sense was they pass rivers, they pass all this other stuff. And now I get it that like the vegetation, they find like a beetle and they're impressed because that's sort of like life that's sort of found a way kind of thing. All right, fine. But there are still ways of generating power, like you say, like the fact that there's this weird notion in a lot of these things, and this is where I do sort of like hold up, The Walking Dead to an extent. I like that show to the first sort of several seasons. I got to about season 9, 10-ish. Um, but one of the things I think that's interesting in that is it kind of sort of says, okay, we're gonna the communities will pop up, but they're not going to be like modern communities. They're going to revert back to a sort of pre-industrial revolution kind of standard. All right, we're going to have sort of like a blacksmith, and we're going to have a doctor, and we're going to have a teacher. Da, da, da. There's going to be this kind of village community that will survive in this way, and we're going to farm, and it's going to be kind of small hold, so on and so forth. Right? Cool. Okay. We're a clan-based people. That's what we do. We'll gravitate to these things. But in this, no one does that. apart from the cannibals. The only way you will be in a group is if you're a cannibal, and that's how why everybody else is on their own. But like you're right, there must be places where you go like, oh, there's still these buildings that exist. Like there are literally like castles that you could be like, cool. There are large buildings that could be fortified. Why are people not doing these things? Like I don't know. It just feels
Well, I mean,
weirdly kind of
I
pointless.
love in Walking Dead that they use a prison.
Mm,
I
mm.
mean, and again, you're right. I mean, like The Walking Dead is melodramatic. It's got, some silly elements to it, but it will think through some of these things, right? And yes, they're still concerned about gasoline, but in reality,
Yeah.
if like you should be sending out crews trying to scavenge for miles around, right?
Mm.
I mean, in a weird way, I was thinking about comparing this to other movies, and I thought, like, uh, I thought, On the Beach, if you want bleak, On the
Yeah.
Beach is a lot bleaker than this.
Yes.
But On the Beach has real characters, right? It has humans reacting to other humans in recognizable ways. Um, it wasn't made by an alien who didn't seem to understand human psychology. Um, but I mean, I think that's a much bleaker movie.
Mm-hmm.
And in a weird way, I think The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price, I was a critic of that movie. That movie gives me a much better sense of somebody actually living in a post-apocalyptic landscape than this movie does.
Yeah.
And that's Vincent Price fighting vampires, for fuck's sake. And I have more of a sense of, I feel like you really do live in this landscape and you've thought about, what you're doing day in and day out than in this movie.
No, I agree. I think you're right. I think there's just it's desperate attempt to be as bleak as possible. Like it kind of like foregoes everything else. And like you say, we're coming up to the hour now for this for talking about this. There's just nothing like we've in other all these other films when we've done the post apocalypse and we'll when we do the wrap up and stuff, it'll be interesting to get to this idea of like themes and things we've seen throughout these films. But there's nothing here. There's no theme. Do you know what I mean? There's nothing to go like, well, this is about, as you said, like,
Parenthood,
well,
protecting your kid.
but even
Except
then,
it doesn't work.
it doesn't work because he's, it's not like he has this mission or this moral because he's willing to sort of, well, even then he sort of says, the two bullets are for us, and then at the end of the film they say, I can't do it, and he doesn't, and he sort of dies having left his son behind. So I don't know. There's nothing to me. There's like they meet characters, the characters are bad or almost indifferent, and then they move on. Like none of the events in this film have a consequence on the next event that they come across.
Yeah, and that might be part and parcel of that episodic structure. But again, it's not a consistent universe. I don't feel the sense of like, like it's like, well, let's have them be cannibals. Wouldn't that be dark, right? I mean,
Yeah.
even from the beginning, it's like that's the thing we fear the most, right? Okay, we're fine having that be in the movie, but cannibalism, let's be clear, is the most inefficient way of feeding a population, right? That's what you do on the ship when, I
And
mean,
all's lost.
right. When you're really desperate, right?
Mm-hmm.
You bring that guy along just in case you need an extra food
Well,
source, right?
but
I mean,
even in that
but
sense,
you've got to
like
feed them up until that point, right?
yeah,
Like this is
skinny people aren't going to taste great. Like they'll be yeah. No, the thing is, the other thing that this film kind of I think misses, in that we've seen in a lot of these films, is an element of like ritual. Like if you're going to introduce cannibalism, or, is it if it's just going to be just an efficient thing, like which is what they're trying to suggest it is, like, oh, one of our party's now been killed, chop his head off, gut him, take the body. Like that's what it's for. I don't buy that because even like butchers, I'm not saying they sort of have a dance and it's not like a sort of a folklore kind of approach, but like there'll be a process. There's almost like a ritual to sort of to how they cut the meat. Oh, but no, this is the best bit. We do that first, then you do this. Like there'll be a
or honoring the dead. I mean, humans
yeah,
are ritual people, right? We
exactly.
all have rituals. Our brains function that way. Our societies function that way. This is an excellent point.
It just becomes everything's just fallen to the wayside, and because of that, this feels so devoid of humanity that it actually, like you say, it feels inhuman, but not in a kind of way that's saying like, "Oh, we are inhumane animals." No, animals are ritualistic. Like you see, animals will do things like this is just almost robotic in its approach to things to such an extent that, like you say, the acting is good. I like, the boys isn't. Sorry, I find the boy endlessly irritating and inconsistent from scene to scene. But at least like Viggo Mortensen
Well,
is
you
a
do
good
want his
actor.
father to kill him.
Oh yeah, no, I would have been happy if he'd have left him to the cannibals and just done one, to be perfectly honest. But
The father just is like, I've done a lot for you. I'm out, and just
yeah,
runs
yeah,
away by himself.
hands, yeah, yeah. I'm washing my hands. Here you go, lads. Starters and run. Um, no, like, Viggo Mortensen's good in this film. Like he is, he's one of those actors that sort of at this period, obviously, he's a bit of a method actor. I'm sure he was walking around smelling of piss and dirt for most of the set. It seems fine, but there's just sort of like, at least there's that. But the characters are so two dimensional that it's like there's no growth or like we hear there's even like a narration, there's a voiceover for parts of the film that provide so little expansion of the world that he sort of says, like you said, oh, cannibalism is the worst thing we fear, or later on it's sort of like, I don't know why she left us, she just walked into the dark, and you go, yeah, I saw that. Why are you telling me this? Like, you're not adding anything to this story. Like, nothing here is of any use. It's almost like they're trying to produce. Do you know what it reminded me of? Actually, and I thought about this because I'm packing up the house at the moment because we're going to move soon, and there's a series that Alan Moore wrote that Jason Burrows did the art for called Providence, and it's kind of like a Lovecraft homage. It covers all the things. But one of the things it does, it's kind of like it's more Alan Moore doing Lovecraft. And he tried to sort of connect with his Watchmen days. So you have like an issue, and then you have a diary entry at the back of the book, right? And the diary entry is sort of like by the main character. But what you find is very quickly the diary entry just retells you what's happened in the book.
Right. Yep.
And so you end up going like, why am I reading this? I've literally just read the comic that's told me this. I don't need to reread this. Um, and I feel that with this film, where you sort of watch bits and then the voice comes over, it's bleak. It's a very bleak world. I think we should all kill ourselves. And you go, yeah, I get that. You've told us that. Like, this is just literally the last scene. You're telling me what just happened. Why are we having a voiceover? This is it. Oh, it's dialogue from the book. That's what you're telling me. Okay, you wanted to include dialogue from the book, but you can't have that dialogue between him and his son, so you have to have this voiceover. Like, it feels so cheap and again, just sort of like pointless. Like, yeah, it was irritating me towards the end.
I agree with everything you've just said. The thing about cannibalism, I am perfectly fine. Look, in a post-apocalyptic world, if I'm in charge and somebody dies, we're eating that body. Okay, I'm a vegan. Okay, but that represents a huge amount of calories and fat and resources. Somebody dies, we are using that, right? That's the buffalo, and we're using every part of it. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
but we'll have, it's not going to be mean. We'll have a nice little ritual, whatever. But we're not going to kill people for meat. If you encounter somebody in this wasteland, right? The most salient fact about them is that somehow they've managed to survive, right?
Yeah.
What are the tactics they're using? What are they using for food? Do they know of a cache of food? Do they have, knives or guns or survival tactics and strategies? Are they aware of, the terrain? All of that stuff. The most amazing thing is that they're still alive, right? Yeah, sure. If they die, by all means, eat them. By all means, if you are low on resources and you don't know that you can support 7 people, right? The Donner Party is going to happen at some point, right? If things get that desperate. but you don't encounter somebody and instantly use them as a food source. That is not
Yeah.
something that human beings have ever done in history. This is not something that animals do. This is just, and what I keep coming back to, and you're talking about the narration made me think of this, is just like, this is a 16-year-old emo boy's idea of what a dark landscape is, and
Yes.
what, like a serious, dark, post-apocalyptic thing would be. It's not actually logical. It actually shows no understanding of the human condition. It's just a 16-year-old's idea of, like, but it's dark. But at least, like, when Zack Snyder goes, but it's dark, like, at least there's a kick. At least there's somebody in a costume. At least there's something, right?
Yeah.
We might object to it. This is just, but it's dark,
Yeah.
and thinks it's deep.
Yeah. No, I agree. 100% agree. And it just, there's, this thing about this idea of you said about, the ritual that goes with it, or even there's what humans do. Like, we don't just walk and be like, I see a walking sausage, or, bunch of chops. Like, that's not how it works.
Like a Looney Tunes cartoon. Like,
yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's not. It just doesn't. It doesn't work that way. It kind of, the point you just made though, that's interesting, is we highlighted before that they've been this is 10 years since this apocalypse, right? At least, because they've obviously the boy has been raised post-apocalypse. And you're right, they come across people that have survived for a decade. No society has been sort of rebuilt in any way. Things keep getting worse. Trees are just disintegrating, whatever. But if when they come across the old man, or like the black guy, or even, whatever, you come to a house and you go, okay, how have they survived for 10 years? Well, they've got people kept captive in the basement. All right, cool. Anything else? Like, how are they farming? What tools have they got? Like, what else can we learn from this? You're right. It's like there's no point where they go, like, what's happened for the last 10 years that's allowed these people to survive? Because it all just feels like this happened yesterday, and actually we're now in just the sort of like the immediate aftermath of the apocalypse. This one seems inconsistent. The other thing that, like, if this is so trying to sort of commit to that, realism of being gritty and miserable, when they find that shelter, the sort of the air raid shelter or whatever it is, that's full of food, it's been there for 10 years. Can we just say things in cans aren't? It's like fuel. Things in cans don't last forever. They're not immortal. They still go off. I hate this thing again. Another trope of, like, it's canned food. Yeah, cool. Find a tin of beans that's 10 years old and eat it. Let's see what happens. But the other thing is, like, if these people have been starving, barely eating, right, and they acknowledge how skinny they are and all this other stuff, and I'm sure Vegan Watson went method and was like, oh, to prepare for this role, I've eaten a bean a day for the last sort of 6 months. What would happen is, the moment they try to eat some of that rich canned food that contains sugars and syrups and starch, they would be sick as a dog.
Very good point.
Because the body just can't process that stuff anymore. They'd be like, no, body just would go, nope, bleh, and they'd be sick as a dog. So
yeah, they're just gobbling down Cheetos and correcting the pronunciation, because that's what's important, right?
yeah.
But yeah, excellent point. Right? I mean, yeah, I love what you say about, like, just like exchange of information. Like, when people are crossing a desert, when people go through, the first thing we do as human beings when we encounter people is we have this we have evolved the ability of speech, and if there's one thing that distinguishes us from animals, it's not feeling, it's not morality, it's not anything, but the ability to preserve and exchange detailed information. We are so good at that, at making maps, at saying, how are you surviving, keeping that information secret. That's going to be, information is going to be the key thing. And the very first thing when you encounter somebody, what are you eating? Do you know where other people are? Is the area safe? What are you doing to protect yourself? What strategies are you using? None of that is important here.
Do you know?
Because all that's important is it was dark. It was
Yeah.
blacker than black. Like I get it,
Do you
emo
know?
kid.
Do you know what they're missing? You know what they're missing? Postman. That's what they're missing. No, you are right there. Like exactly. Like this is all I can think of as we've talked about this, right? Because this is obviously set in the States. This is, the American experience. There are nomadic tribes in sort of like the Sahara and the Serengeti and the outback of Australia that are just going like, oh well, and have just carried on. And they're like, yeah, we've lived in this kind of thing. We're good. We're going to be these nomadic tribes and we're still sharing information and we're sort of finding ways of living. Like, I don't know. It just feels like I'll be interested to see how other parts of the world are surviving whatever this is.
Yeah, and you sort of don't see much in terms of vegetation, it's like sort of everything has died, right?
Hmm.
So the question is, how are you surviving for 10 years, right?
Exactly.
Surely some roots have survived, some cockroaches, people are going to be eating, roots, they're going to be eating, tiny little herbs, they're going to be eating cockroaches and insects, uh, you know, um, we're going to change the culture, but you can, there's going to be some way of, we're going to be farming algae,
Mm.
right? Nobody's doing all of that. Their solution is to find other human beings who have survived. Don't ask them any questions, kill them and butcher them immediately for 2 days worth of meat, I guess.
Yeah, that's it.
But that's dark. That's
Yeah.
a bad ad. Like, how is this movie respected by critics who are supposed to be smart people and above the like, yeah, but it's badass. It's so dark, like that's totally what this movie is. It's just like the highbrow version of
Yeah. It's the Mad Max, but without the chaps. That's what it is. This is Sad Max. This is what it is.
that. That's brilliant, Sad Max. The road is just sad. Yeah. Imagine Mad Max. Take out all the humor, idiosyncrasy, costuming, weird culture, weird dialogue. You know, what are you left with?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
Mad Max
that's
made
what
by a
this is.
manic depressive who's just sort of like, do we want crazy cars? And I think, no, can't
No,
have that.
the fucked up thing is like Mad Max is the manic
Yeah,
depressive
it's
version.
true.
It's filled with the manic shit.
Yeah.
Where's the manic shit? I mean, this is just the depressive side.
Yeah. There's so little fun to be had with this. I even sort of it's one of those things if we've had films where we've gone like the film was crap, but the conversation was, we've been able to pull
Mhm.
something out of that. This is one of the situations where like, we've gone like, yeah, we've had fun talking about it, but I'm really struggling to go, is there any other points to talk about here? Like there's
Uh,
so little to sort of pull out of this film.
Well, we talked in the interim between the two halves of the season about the Alien movies.
Mm,
And both of us were critical of Alien Romulus, to different extents and with different foci, but essentially, you know, one of the things that upsets me the most, and I do understand why, but it's upsetting to me that I understand why too, is when critics are so wrong and when smart critics are so wrong and critics I respect who aren't just, I mean, there were, look, I don't mean to say it, a 20-year-old with a blog, there were brilliant 20-year-olds with a blog, but, I mean, when the New Yorker has it deadly wrong, when the Atlantic has it deadly wrong, when they don't see a plot is for shit, when they
hmm
don't, uh, and the reason why this upsets me so much is because I already feel so alone in this world, right? That when I can tolerate that bad movies and stupid movies make money, whatever, but at least I have like some kind of culture, some kind of connection to not necessarily an intelligentsia, but there are people who still read books, aren't there?
hmm
There's at least a few. um and then I see like, okay, right, this piece of shit got a Pulitzer Prize, and this piece of shit movie, made about it that, there's a lot of loves and a lot of effort put into this movie, a lot of money. Again, I think the acting, Morganson is really good. I think, there's a lot of money and a lot of time put into making those really dark, bleak, gray landscapes. Um, but what if there is one thing to really take away from the conversation, it's why the fuck did this pull the wool over the eyes of critics and otherwise smart people who claim to understand something about movies and narrative? What is the appeal? I mean, do you understand, like, why are they blind? I mean,
I
because
think
we're right. There's no argument there.
I think there's a part of it is it's different. Oh, it's brave. It's the thing that's like, this the thing that sort of happened with I think they were expecting with like the latest Joker film, Folie à Deux. There was something like expectation of like, oh, it's so flying in the face of what we expect. It's going to be sort of, it's controversial. It's got, it's edgy, that kind of thing. And it's, with that film, it fell flat because everyone was like, oh, it's not good. But there are people that go like, there are people that are looking at it and go, no, you don't get it. It's this. It's kind of edgy and it does this. And you go, it might do that, but it's not good to watch. And I feel that that's sort of what this film is, where they've sort of said, oh no, this is edgy and it is. It's kind of brave in a sort of a world of like, the budding superhero films that are coming out and blockbusters and all this other stuff. Like they've put this film out that's relentlessly bleak and it's kind of about the human experience and da da da. And I think that's it. I think that's what they're looking at. It's not about often judging the film in its own merits. They're looking at the film landscape and going like, oh, this is an Oscar. This is an Oscar contender for this reason because it's sort of challenging on the cinema landscape. And you go, all right, cool. Still, this is why I don't watch the Oscars, because most of those films, if I'm perfectly honest, I just find boring. You know what I mean? It's sort of like, yeah, I'll admit I like myself a good sort of like solid cheeseburger rather than the sort of the chef's meal. But like, if that's where you see it, but this isn't a chef's meal. This is kind of like pretending to be a chef's meal. This is kind of like a Chef Boyardee kind of thing where they go like, it's got 3 courses, and you go, yeah, but I've microwaved all 3 of them and they taste like shit.
Yeah, no, I think you're zeroing in on it because I like the less and less as I get older, but I like the shit meal,
Mm.
and I also like the amazingly well prepared nutritious thing. I can appreciate both. Um, uh, in meals, I'm more on the latter. But in pop culture, I love me some trashy entertainment. You know where I'm at. But I could do both. I definitely have room for both. But I think what you're zeroing in on is that it's like the love of the good stuff, right? The love of like the foreign movie or the movie doing something different or eschewing the narrative arc or not providing those hopeful little scenes along the way. Um, that group that's just in that countercultural, we like the foreign movie stuff, we like the Oscar stuff, or the old Oscars before they gave Lord of the Rings a fucking Oscar. Is that camp sort of gets to a point where it likes its darlings and where it kind of like likes things that are just different, right? Where it's the David Lynch effect, right?
Hmm.
It's like props to David Lynch for doing something different, but that doesn't mean that they're good movies on the whole, right? I mean, I have respect for the guy and what he's accomplished, but that doesn't mean that, Mulholland Drive is a good fucking narrative, it's just not. Um, and but there is that kind of like countercultural, this drives me crazy because what it really is tribalism, right?
Yes.
It's like,
Yeah.
you know, this is different. It's doing something different. I see the love poured into this. We've got to support this, you know, and that seems like every bit as tribalistic as like football fans and, Marvel fans. And, it just drives me crazy that, for the supposed intelligentsia, the critics to be susceptible to that groupthink,
Well, I
or
think
stamp of approval that's doing something slightly different.
I think it has increased, or I think we're past it a little bit now. I think this year is kind of sort of, and I think we'll come to an end on this point actually
Mhm.
because I think it's quite an interesting point. But the phrase you used there, the intelligentsia, was exactly what I was going to sort of like refer to. is this gatekeeping, isn't it? It's sort of like you mentioned the 20-year-old with the blog, right? And again, I agree. We are just sort of like we're two 40-year-olds with a podcast. Like, how are we any different? Like, we've got more life experience, maybe, but like we are just giving our opinions. Okay. Whether you consider it to be informed or not depends on your point of view. But what I'm saying is like, there was this thing of like, well, I'm a paid reviewer, I'm a paid critic, I work for the New Yorker or the sort of the Guardian or whatever, right? And maybe I'll consider those, but there's almost like you don't understand this because you are not within the art circles. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like, no, 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 no. This film is magnificent. It's a masterpiece. Why? Oh, you wouldn't understand. Because it's beautiful. It's hauntingly beautiful. It's a masterclass in the bleak subgenre of post-apocalyptic parenting. And you're going, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, there's this and like one other film, maybe. Um, I don't know. It just feels like there's going to be that gatekeeping, that intelligentsia, as you say, that kind of sort of go like, no, it's this, it's this. Why I think it's sort of fallen away a little bit is because everyone stopped paying attention to those people more recently, right? And I think that so these things happen. But for example, this year, I think that thing they were expecting the studios kind of rely on those people to come out at times. Doesn't always work. I think of like Babylon that came out the other year that everyone was sort of like, oh, it's not so bad, but like the critics were sort of like again uneven on it. Saltburn was another one where they were like everyone was like, oh, it's amazing, and then other people watching it going like, yeah, it's fine. But I think this is what Megalopolis, um, Francis Ford Coppola was kind of sort of expecting was it to be like, oh, it's an art piece, it's a masterpiece, and everyone's come out and gone, it's a shit show. And the same for Folie à Deux, where there's this expectation of going like, oh my god, you've got to see it because they want someone to be saying you've got to see this because it's challenging our expectations of cinema. It's doing this, doing that, and certain people will go out and see it, and no one did because everyone's gone. I don't need that in my life. I've got enough problems that I've been told to challenge my views on cinema. So I'm actually going to go see Terrifier 3, where a clown's going to use a chainsaw on people, and people go, "Yay!" Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I think we've kind
Yeah,
of fallen away from that a little bit.
but I mean, I mourn the demise of the experts, right? I mourn the demise of, trusting economists on Brexit, and I mourn the demise of uh even of a critical expertise where, today I think there's a lot of pressure on critics to say, yeah, there's a superhero movie that I do like, right? Even if it's not. By the way, Babylon is, one of my favorite movies of all time. It's definitely in my top 5 movies ever made. I think an argument could be made that it is the best movie ever made in human history.
It's just been added to
I
Netflix over here, so it's just joined my watch list.
Oh, I adore that movie. And I think it's it will stand the test of time. I really am blown away by it. But like the interesting thing is like the intelligentsia did not praise
Mm,
Megalopolis.
no, you're right,
They
exactly.
said, look, there are things to be praised here as far as a vision, right? But it's not a good movie, right? Um, and I think that, I mean, even some of the reaction to like Dune, the Villeneuve ones are
Mm.
like, the same way, right? So I mean, I do think, but I want there to be a body of critics. I want there to be an expertise. I want there to be an intelligentsia, not in a pompous,
That's the
way.
difference, though. But that's the difference, and I agree. I want there to be people that can say, "I've studied film, and I can tell you why I think this is a good film because of these reasons." And I'll go, "Okay, I'll listen to that. I will listen to good critics." But when I do see these, and I do see more critics on the pompous side, and that's when it gets is where I'm like, I can't listen to that because it is sort of like in the landscape of film today, this represents this, this, and this. Like, don't care about the landscape of film. Why is this a good film? And I should spend 10 quid on going to see it.
Yeah, 10
That's
quid
what
is
Yeah, all right.
$20 over here.
Yeah,
But
well,
yeah,
more so, like, what if I'm going to spend $20 or 30 quid or whatever? If I'm going to take my family to see this, if I'm going to go see it, why should I do that? What is the thing that's going to get me into, and why can I appreciate this film? And more, there are films I love, and there are films, modern films I've gone, that's a really good film. I've really enjoyed that, and it is a good, challenging film. But like, and I will agree to some of the critics. But then there's others when they exactly like this film where the critics will laud it, and I'm like, I don't understand what you're talking about. This is crap.
you know what's an interesting comparison here is Hard to Be a God. Because you
Mm,
and I both preferred the 80s version, right? Which was
yeah,
lower budget. But even the critically acclaimed, later version is a better movie than this. And
yeah,
has
yeah.
things to say. It's a mess of a movie, there's a lot of reasons to criticize it. But it is a better movie than this. It has things to say. It is complex, it's confused, it's got issues, but I mean, that is a masterpiece of love that, really is trying to get at some shit. And, I can appreciate that from exactly the angle you're saying, of sort of
I
like,
would agree. Yeah,
yeah, but I mean, for me, liking this movie is possibly a sort of like telltale sign that somebody is on that pretentious, I feel like I should like this because it is artsy, sort
mm.
of side of things.
I could understand like yourself. I wouldn't want to sit through that version of Hard to Be a God again. Like it was too much. But
I take full responsibility.
yeah, but as I said, that one of the things is when we went back to that, I had a visceral reaction to that film. Like it literally made me feel like I need to take a break. One of the few films in my life where I've gone like, okay, enough's enough. Like, I need to just go, then with a glass of water, touch some grass, and we'll come back to it. Um, for that, and it was good at doing that. So I can appreciate people saying, I can see that as a piece of art. Like that's challenging. It's weird. It's got some ideas. And it's to kind. Oh, we're not going to go down the regular route. We're going to do this thing. And so, I can appreciate that. I still think about that film. Like I don't.
Mhm.
It's not one I want to go back to, like I say, but I still think about the film. There are frames from that film. There are scenes from that film that's still in my head that I'll sort of think, oh yeah, that was actually interesting. That there's nothing from this film I will ever go back to. And
Yeah, it's very one note.
yeah, that's the difference. This film, as you said, this film was 2 hours just under, and it repeats itself. Hard to Be a God is what, 3 hours?
Yeah, like three and a half.
Yeah, and
But kind of needs to be like six,
yeah,
to make its plot make sense.
yeah, and but never repeats itself. It just goes on to the next insanely weird thing, that's going to happen. So yeah, no, that's a really good comparison. I completely agree with that. I'd even say like Delicatessen,
Mhm.
where I really, again, a film that sort of like I had thoughts on. I enjoyed that to a large degree. Makes me want to go see more from that director.
Mhm.
It made me reassess Alien Resurrection, which I thought was a never going to happen. But like, it's one of those films that you can sort of, when people say to me, "Oh yeah, I really like Delicatessen," and I can go, I can see people going like, "Why? It's weird and it's French and it's just need to go." Oh well, because it does this and it's doing that. You can explain it, and it's kind of like, again, maybe
Right.
it's that sense of, in each of those films, um, that even just despite everything, there's a sense of whimsy. There's a sense of like, usually at heart, you feel there's a touch of the human about it, about both those films, despite everything that goes on in those insane films. There's not in this film. The road is almost devoid of the human touch in that sense.
And I think if anything, Hard to Be a God or On the Beach
Mm,
are darker, more cynical movies than this. This just this feels like a parody. I mean, it feels like, that teenager just saying like, I mean, and everybody who's explained to me why they love this movie, it's just like, but he does everything for that kid, like it's so bleak, it's so, realistic, it's so, and it's like, no, it's not realistic. It's not realistic practical logistically. It's also not realistic psychologically. There's nothing here but that one note of it was dark, darker than dark.
yeah.
Um, And if you're fooled by that, I mean, I guess you're fooled by that, but it doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah, that's it. It doesn't. Yeah, I think fooled by you, fooling people. I don't know, and I'd be interested to see that conversation. But yeah, there's just
Yeah.
it's not for me. Interesting way. I think when we go back and in the next episode, when we do our recap of this season, I think I'm going to hold this as a bit of a sort of a right. This is this version at this end of the spectrum. Let's have a look at like where does everything else sit on that sort of post-apocalyptic spectrum? How have we approached the different kinds of a spectrum? Like, at the other end of the spectrum is kind of like the zany whimsy of sort of your tank girls and your Beyond Thunderdomes and that kind of thing, and let's meet in the middle somewhere.
Well, let's be clear. I made you watch Art to be a God. Hell Comes to Frogtown is a better movie than The Road. I firmly believe that. And they're very different modes, right?
Oh
And
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not
yeah.
just saying that because I love whimsy and, weird shit. But I mean, I think it's a better made movie for all of its like poorly made aspects.
Yeah. What you're saying is every post-apocalyptic film needs a crazed Scottish Canadian wrestler as its star. That's what
I
we're
would
saying.
not go that far. But some frog mutants, doing weird shit, a frog stripper. I mean,
Yeah.
look,
Yeah.
honestly, that's as balls to the wall, like committing to it as this movie is, a very different mode, right? One's in
Mm.
whimsy, one's in realism, or wannabe, but one is much more consistent. One of the key things of since the art for art's sake movement is that we judge works of art based on what they want to be, right?
Hmm.
Not what we want to be, right? I mean, I can't watch The Road and say it needs to have more frog mutants in it, right? That's not an informative critique. But in terms of what it wants to be, like How Comes to Frogtown or, Tank Girl, or, like they're not achieving what they want. They're limited by budget, but there definitely are moments where they are firing on all cylinders. They have achieved exactly you know, that tone that they want to achieve, where the movie's working. This wants to be dark and realistic, and it makes me laugh. It makes you want to watch a kid be shot. It makes, and not because it's so dark, but because it's ridiculous,
Mm.
laughable in its ability to present what it wants to present.
Yes. No, it is. Parody is almost where it ends up, isn't it? Unfortunately. And I was going to read the novel. I was going to listen to it probably, but I was going to do an audible. But like having watched the film, I'm now like, no, I'm not going to bother. That's hours of my life I can use doing something else or listening to something else. So I think I will. Anyway,
Well, it was supposedly he wrote it in like 6 weeks or something, and it shows. You
okay.
know, yeah.
And he was in a
But
dark mood at the time.
well, apparently he was looking at a landscape and was thinking about like what it would look like in a sort of like post-apocalyptic, and that kind of like is the origin of it. Like, yeah, I've had those thoughts too. I could write a better novel in 6 weeks. By the way, it would have won a Pulitzer Prize, but
Yeah. Yeah. It's an odd one. Was it No Country for Old Men? That was based on the Cormac McCarthy book as well, wasn't it?
yeah,
I feel like that's a better story and a better Cormac McCarthy sort of story.
I wish there were a sci-fi element of Babylon so we could talk about that instead.
Well, it's about old Hollywood, isn't it?
Yeah,
No, you could do it on 20th Century Geek. Maybe that's a way to sneak that in. We'll have a think about that.
anytime.
Anyway, we'll bring this to a close. That's it. That's the end of our apocalypse movies for now. In the next episode, we'll do our sort of season review as we wrap up all these films. But yeah, for now, let us know what you think about this.
Are we
Is
full of
this
shit? We're
yeah?
just dumb. I don't know nothing. I'm a dumb hit from Illinois,
That's it.
and I just don't understand me that road shit.
We are not the intelligentsia. That's what we're saying.
I
Yeah, but
need
is
some
this,
mutant frog action.
who doesn't? Let's be here. When the end of the world comes, who doesn't eat frogs? But anyway, yeah, let us know. Yeah, do you agree or disagree with this? Is this Sad Max or is it like a masterclass of post-apocalyptic cinema? I'm interested to see what you think. Anyway, if you like what we're doing and you have enjoyed this, please do leave a review on your podcast catcher. Give us the feedback. And go check out the Patreon for just sort of like $5 a month. You get hours of additional entertainment. We do other films. Hell Comes to Frogtown, Six String Samurai, another version of On the Beach, and The Threads, and When the Wind Blows. Lots of other sort of post-apocalyptic films. More bleak
Oblivion.
films. Yeah, Oblivion. Yeah. But for now, I hope you've enjoyed this and you want to come back for some more. But for now, Julian, thank you very much for this conversation, and
Thank you, Scott.
at least bringing some joy out of having watched The Road.
I had more fun talking with you than I
Yes.
did watching the movie.
Good. Yes, it's provided some entertainment. But ladies and gentlemen, for now, thank you very much, and we shall see you on the next episode.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.